guys. Welcome to the Angel Zierden podcast. Really excited to kick off episode 2. And tonight, I have here with me Denise Slipy. Super excited to be talking to you tonight. We have some kind of fun stories, right? And some
Absolutely
fun experiences. And why don't you go ahead and tell people who you are and what you do? And
All right, so I'm Denise Slipy. I'm currently a special deputy with the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Department. I work at the jail. I'm a corrections officer. And I also am the communications director and the chair for SD6 for the Crow Wing County DFL.
Awesome. And so why don't we just kind of get right to it? I think that our story, people really need to hear. I think especially in today's political climate and everything that we're seeing, I think that it would be, good for everyone to hear that. So go ahead and you can start from where you want to start.
All right, well, we'll start with opening the office. So we opened an office last October in Brainerd. And one of the first people that walked through the door, of course, was our former Congressman, Rick Nolan. And he's like, "Hey, don't you live in Breezy Point?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Do you know who your mayor is?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I voted for her." I said, "But I don't know her. And he's like, "You need to make that connection." I just kind of rolled my eyes at him.
Tell everybody why you rolled your eyes, though, and tell everybody who Kim is, too, because I think this matters.
So I happen to be a lesbian, and my wife is the Crow Wing County chair, and we had received a message that Angel was this straight white cis person who did not believe in same-sex marriage, did not believe in the progressive movement at all, and just basically turned us off of knowing her before we even got the chance to know her.
Which happens a lot.
It does happen a lot. It's one of those things that people are polarizing people before you get the opportunity to sit down.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving forward, the next person who is a really dear friend of mine, Jen Schultz, who is running for Congress against Pete Stauber, reached out and she says, "Do you know Angel Zierden?" I said, "She's our mayor. I don't know her." And she says, "Will you make a connection with her?" And so now this is two people that I totally admire have asked me to reach out. So I didn't say too much. I just went home that night, got on Facebook, and I sent you a message, which I'm going to say within about 10 minutes you responded when and where when I asked if we could have coffee.
Yeah.
You didn't even ask what my political background was. You didn't ask why I wanted to meet. I just said, I think we need to make a connection. Do you have time? And it was literally a when and where.
Yeah. And I think what was so fun is we both came into it just like not really knowing. And how long? 2 hours, maybe?
Oh, God. It started off, it was going to be maybe a half an hour, basically a cup of coffee and talk. And yeah, 2.5 hours later, we're still talking and have to end it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we had other things, and, Kim was there too. And,
Yes.
I think what is so interesting just about that is, even though I had, been a part of the Republican Party, even the last episode of the podcast, I kind of addressed, why I feel like I'm more independent than anything. And, we just talked about that, right? We talked about that a lot in the first meeting because you're feeling the exact same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not crazy, right? So I don't belong in the Republican Party, but I'm not crazy left. So it's almost like I don't belong in the DFL party with today's standards. However, since we have, really become involved with the political, quote unquote, we're finding out that there's more people like us than are on the fringes. And bridging these gaps are so important that, if you don't feel like that you're being currently represented or, people aren't doing what you're asking them to do, first of all, they're an elected official. Second, You know, you are the representative for everybody, not just the people that
Right.
are on your party ticket, right? You're everybody's. And we're finding out that more people are independent than just the two-party system.
Right. Yeah, and I think that that's where, we kind of said, well, we're both feeling this way. We're both in quote unquote different parties, but yet we sit down and there's really not anything that we disagree with. Actually, I think there's pretty much every issue, every major issue,
Yep.
we can sit down and say, we don't just think this, there's all these other things, that aren't black and white. And I wish more people were having those conversations, but that there's just not a lot of opportunity to in politics because they say pick a side,
Right.
and it makes it really tough.
Well, even with our current senator, I mean, look at Amy Klobuchar. You know, she's fabulous. She reaches across the aisle. She bridges that gap, and you know, the Republicans still say that she's this crazy liberal, but the DFL side of things, especially in the greater areas, are saying that she's more of a Republican than she is a Democrat.
Yeah.
And first of all, we need to rip off them labels.
Yeah.
Because we're all human. Amy's done a fantastic job with everything, with being able to reach across the aisles.
Yeah.
And she couldn't have reached across the aisle had she been a crazy liberal.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like I've seen her in more of like the intimate setting in DC, right? Talking to the chamber and, very, very moderate. Then I've also seen her though in, the Democratic setting. And sometimes you change a little bit in how you talk to your audiences. Now,
Right.
this is true across the board.
It is
right?
true. Yep.
We saw the Republicans talk in DC, but then they come home and they talk to their Republican constituents, and it is very different, right?
Yes.
So they use the differences for the audience. I think that can be a little bit misleading sometimes, just because, when you're talking to a room full of people that you don't know their party affiliation, it's almost like, why can't we talk that way no matter who is in the audience? Because I do think people, who do work across aisles, I mean, I'll use an example. Senator Paul Gazelka, when he ran, I mean, when he was the majority leader for the Senate, he did work across aisles, and he did have, his relationship with the governor, and people in the Republican Party called him a rhino and, called them all these things. So it's almost like when you are actually doing what the most people are asking for, you are then criticized for that. It's like, it doesn't matter what you do. It's like once you're in there, it's like you're criticized for working with the other side.
Absolutely.
But then everyone's saying, oh, they need to start working with the other side. Like, so it's like a lose-lose for
Yeah.
a lot of people who get in. Not to mention, I mean, let's just talk about the caucus system, right? Because that is another issue in Minnesota. And so I think a lot of people actually don't know what a BPOU is. So, I mean, why don't you go ahead? Because, you're...
Yeah, so for the DFL side, we all come together, and we actually, being as Kim had just became the chair last year, we actually decided to bring everybody together, and we did it at the Brainerd High School, and we, I want to say there's probably 100, 120 people tops. Some people came in, cast their vote and left, or wrote down what their resolution was and left, but for the most part, it was just a coming together of like-minded folks. And when we went through our resolutions to get them ready for, the state convention coming up, we're sitting and talking, and everybody is just, it's refreshing to see everybody thinking the same way. And at the end of the day, it's all about the community. What can we do to make our community better?
Right.
The housing issue, the childcare issue, the mental health crisis. I mean, there's just a lot of the resolutions was based on that.
Right.
And it's refreshing, and there was no bickering and no fighting. It was,
Right.
neighbors being neighborly,
Right.
you know?
And Republicans tend to eat themselves more so than Democrats, and that's something that we've seen, actually, very much so in the Republican Party. And, for people who don't know, so the BPOU is a basic principal operating unit, basic political operating unit. And when, you see candidates with a D or an R next to their name, most people actually don't know how they got the D or the R next to their name. So in the state of Minnesota, we're actually few states. There is not many states left that still operate to this capacity. Right. But you show up for your precinct caucus, then you become a delegate, and then you have your county convention, which then you, through those, we maybe had like 120 at our Crow Wing County. And that's where then those delegates vote for who has a D or an R next to their name for House of Representatives, and
endorsing committees.
Yep, exactly. And then usually at the big county convention is when you then vote to who becomes a state delegate, and then the state delegates go down to usually Rochester is typically where they have it, and then that's where if it's an election year for the governor, position and others and Congress too. So I think that's how you get to the D or the R. The problem is that what we've seen is there hasn't been a good representation of Democrats and Republicans showing up for those positions that then elect those leaders. So typically candidates have to run two different campaigns.
Right.
What have you seen from the Democrat side? Have you seen that as an issue here or even around the state? Has that been even a topic of conversation for you guys?
I think a lot of it is finding good people to run. Yeah. Most people, especially from the Democratic side, right? They don't want to put their name out there because of the threats, because of the bashing, even the stuff that you're. Yeah. Obviously, as the mayor, you're not for either party because you represent the whole city, and just the backlash and stuff that you've received. Yeah. I was actually thinking about running, and I'm like, oh no, no, because everybody complains. We call it the bitch and moan session, right? Yeah. You bitch and moan about things not getting done, but then when you've got somebody in that is knocking down the walls, breaking the glass ceilings and is moving things, the mover and the shaker and the trailblazer. Well, we don't want that either, so yeah. I think it's time that people stop, doing the blame game. Yeah. Show up at your meetings, let your voices be heard. Don't be just, the radical right or the radical left. Come with solutions.
Yeah. That's a tough one for people though, because that takes, effort to find solutions, but people typically don't want to take the time, right? Or have the conversations, right?
Yeah, or have that conversation. Yeah. Just, I like I said, I would have probably never reached out because I had already been biased, right, against you. And then, after we had this conversation, the 2-hour conversation, we wound up with a very good friend, a very good ally, somebody that you can get behind and support because, believe it or not, even at our ripe young age, we're going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that are bitter and don't want change and stuff, well, half the time they aren't here anyway. They're only here for the summer. And then the other half, are they even going to be here in 20 years?
Right.
Let's leave a better future for our kids, for our grandkids, for, let's leave a better future.
And I think a lot of people, have gone and done, their part of life. So they get to a place where they say, you know what, it's about me now. Mm-hmm. And, there's some aspect to that in retirement and everything. But I think that's where, when we typically look at the two-party system, you do see a lot of character traits, right? Mm-hmm. Where there are a lot, most young kids are liberal, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they haven't, but, there's an aspect of that where it's like, well, they haven't really paid taxes yet. They haven't started a business yet. They haven't had kids yet. And so what happens over time is you can move towards more of, the not traditional Republican values, but more of like the conservatism of it. Mm-hmm. But then I think the other problem becomes is when you get to that age and you have those people who then run for office, it's this, it's not coming together. And, I talked about Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice in the first episode. And one of the things that Condoleezza Rice stated is she said consensus was built upon the backs of the relationships of those who disagree.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we really get it wrong, is that you have the generational gaps and then you have the experience, but you can almost argue both sides of an issue.
You can. Yes.
It just depends on which angle you're coming at that issue. And, I had this housing issue. The Dispatch article was great, and I have a couple guys that and women, moms especially, that live in the rentals. But I just had my first eviction, and that eviction cost me $7,000 in repairs, $6,000 in back rent, and $1,500 in attorney fees. And I looked at that and I said, you know what? I said, I can relate this situation to the two parties. I said, I can look at it from, look what that cost me, right? Because I gave someone a chance. Or I can look at it from the perspective of, but look who has benefited and done well because of the chance. So you could argue both sides, right? You could say, well, I don't want to do this because, is that your phone?
I'm also a first responder for the Zone 3, North Crow Wing County.
There you go. But you can argue from both sides and just say, well, I'm not going to do this, or I don't like this because this happened, or I'm not going to do this. So I think that if more people would come together and just have conversations and be civil, you'd be surprised how much would actually get done and how much you have in common.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We invited you to come to one of our meetings, just, as a guest. And I think for the most part, you had a very, very warm welcoming. There was one person that wasn't, but by the end, right?
Yeah, it was fine.
But by the end of the conversations and by the end of the meeting and people got to know you and knew why you were there, you were, I hope, felt 100% welcome.
Absolutely. The walls have to come down, like you stated, right? Like, I know people who are Republicans in our area who have said to me, I don't have a single friend who's a Democrat. And I don't understand that. Like, I can't wrap my head around that.
Let me clarify. You do, but they just don't want to come out to you. So are you really their friend?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's, that's a really good point, because I think that, a lot of people too, they don't want to bring up the conversation of politics because of the people who are so, they'll criticize you and you're not allowed to, have a difference of opinion.
Oh.
And again, I think for us, and why I love that you guys are going into this with the framework and the, that you have, is just to say everyone is welcome to come. And I want to show people like, hey, you know what? Like, I feel like it's really funny though. It's almost like, you brought a Republican? Like if I have like an R, that should be like stitched into my,
It's a scarlet letter.
Yeah, I like an R that should be stitched into my jacket. Like if it's like, a bad thing. But I also want to do the same, right? Because all we hear about is what's going on in the media. And that is so far from like what is actually happening.
Well, and the kitchen table issues, right? The kitchen table issues for us are not going to be the same as what is for you, right? You're a married mother first and foremost. Then you are a mayor,
right?
And then you're working for the community on the backside of things too, doing things that need to be done. Where the kitchen table issues for us are, we are taking care of our parents that are up in years, and I shouldn't say taking care of them. They live with us.
Yeah.
We are ready.
Which is common.
Yes.
It is. It's very common.
We are ready to step in for that caregiver role.
Right.
And I think, our kids are grown. We have the grandkids, but they're out of the house right now. So we're kind of that in between.
Right.
right? So our kitchen table issues are going to be different. It's how much is the medicine this month?
Right.
How much is long-term care going to be if something
Right. Which is
happens?
extremely
Yeah.
expensive.
And it's the health care, that not just for, the females, female reproductive rights or anything like that, but for the elderly.
Right.
I mean, mom and dad worked hard all their life for what little pension that they get right now.
Right.
And if they're having to spend it, X amount on rent, X amount on medicine, now they have to make that decision on, well, and we're fortunate that we don't have that at
Right.
this current time, but that could easily be. I mean, most Americans are 3 paychecks away from being homeless.
Right. Right. Yeah. Most
So-
people don't have money in the bank.
Right.
And actually, you made a good point, because I don't think I've actually shared this out loud yet. We talked about the reproductive rights, and everyone can have a different opinion. Sometimes a lot of it's just terminology that, like, kind of like the gender, affirming care. That could just
Right.
be therapy, right?
Right.
That could have nothing to do. But I mean, we put these labels, and I want to go back to that because Planned Parenthood has always been a huge topic of conversation, and I think from the perspective of the right, a negative one, right? Like, it's strictly abortion, that's it. But what is, most women, I think, are going to understand things a little bit different than men. I used Planned Parenthood when I didn't have
Right.
medical coverage, especially when I was trying to be an entrepreneur and running my tech company in the cities. And what most people don't know is that the first time I got to see Liam on a scan was at a Planned Parenthood in Minneapolis. And because when I got pregnant with him, I didn't have health insurance. And so that was, for me, the only place that I knew to go to that first checkup. And so, I mean, and this is where I think the politics of everything always gets so sticky, because we have these categories, and we have these terminology, and it really just puts a negative light on it, when in fact, you could argue for.
So terminology, right? So my brother-in-law makes the comment the other day, I can't believe the abortions and this and this and this. And he had tried, he and his wife had tried so hard to have a child. And it was just miscarriage after miscarriage and heartbreak after heartbreak, right?
I can't.
Well, they finally had a viable pregnancy. And my mother-in-law point blank said, what do you think the procedure was that your wife had? A DNC is considered an abortion. Well, no.
Yeah.
It's
So
considered.
is inducing.
Yes, so is
Yeah.
inducing. So, we need to be careful these things that we're going out there and voting against, because healthcare, right? Healthcare, the terminology, educate yourself, because if you're saying ban all abortions, well, the next time, especially if it's somebody that has problems getting pregnant, right?
Yeah.
The next time that you have a miscarriage,
Right.
you could die from it, because they're not going to be allowed to go in and take care of it.
Which is crazy, and this is, I think, what's happening in Arizona
Mm-hmm.
right now. And this is where I have always stated, I did not, I was never for banning abortion, and I'll tell you why. I think that I've shared a lot of my past. My mom was actually forced to get an abortion before me and after me, and it was because my father was so abusive, and when your life is at stake, and so my mom is pro-life, right? My mom today is pro-life, and I'm sure we've had many conversations about this, and I look at her, and I want to stand up for people like her, because instead of fighting whether or not abortion, which needs to be system on how we even look at the term abortion needs to
Right.
change.
Right.
But I would much rather fight for women to say, how do we prevent women from getting into that situation? How do we make sure that women who are in these abusive relationships, can get out? And how do we
Right.
take care of our people? And so instead of abortion being right or wrong, figuring out how do we prevent these things from happening. And I think if we focused on things like that, we would see a change.
Absolutely.
And that goes, from a mental health standpoint and an education standpoint. I mean, everything is so connected that until we get more of a movement for people to sit down, I mean, talk about mental health, that's a nonpartisan issue.
Should be.
But
Yes.
it's used as leverage,
Right.
And so is every immigration. Right now they're using the border and reform as leverage against each other. And it's like, guys, this is two separate issues. Like, we don't have to, one is not independent of the other. And so, and that's why, too, for us, I think that what we're doing, I'm super excited for, because people need a home.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that just means that we have to invite them into an atmosphere that says, don't come through the door if you are going to criticize, blame, come in here, let's sit down and let's find some solutions to some of these problems.
We had a gentleman come in the other day to the office, and there was already two of us sitting there having a conversation, right? And old timer, Don's been around for, oh my gosh, well, I think 1946 was his first DNC convention.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And he and I are having a conversation because he wants to end. His first one was in Chicago, and he wants his last one to be in Chicago. And he would be the most consecutive Democrat National Convention
Wow.
attendees
Yeah.
if he gets to go.
Right.
And so he and I were sitting there, and we were joking and cutting up a little bit. And this gentleman walks in, and at first I just kind of looked at him, and you could tell that he had probably just left a shelter.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he comes over and he sits down, and of course, got coffee, got water, there's some snacks. Can I get you anything? And he's like, water would be good. So I gave him a bottle of water, and we're talking, and come to find out, I learned a little of his story, because I could have finished sitting there talking to him all day, but he had a bus to catch.
Okay.
And he told me, he says, I've always wondered how we got to where we are today. He said, I'm a veteran. He said, and I'm homeless. He said, I served my country. He said, and I served it well. He said, and now I'm on my way to the VA right there in Brainerd. He said, and they're putting me on a bus. He said, and I'm going closer to Maryland. And I don't recall if he had family there, or if there's, some descendant there, a friend, or anyway. That's where he's going to live out his years. And as he got up to leave, and by the way, folks, I still get a little bit emotional talking about it. As he got up to leave, he opened his wallet, and he had a little bit of money, but not much, right? And he takes a $20 bill out, and he says, do you guys take donations? And I'm telling him, first of all, yes, we take donations. I said, but you need this more than we do.
Right.
And he's like, no. He says, it's so important that people like me have a place that they can come and have a conversation. He said, and we've got to keep the Democratic way going. He said, and, so we've set up a little corner, and it's a little donation box. It's called Bob's 20. His name was Bob. And Bob's 20 is going to go to veterans and trying to help homeless.
Awesome.
So that's a campaign that we're just now starting, because this just happened last week. But when I'm in there and I'm hearing these stories of people who feel like that they don't have a home, you do have a home. The DFL party is not just Democrat, okay? It's Democrat, farmer, and labor. And we're going to fight for you. We have been fighting for you. However, we're not going to go to the crazy left,
Right.
right? Nobody wants the crazy left.
And that's what we see on TV.
And that's
the unfortunate side of it.
that's all you see. That's all you see, and all you hear is the extremes. You don't hear the moderate people having conversations.
And this is not being wishy-washy, right?
No.
And that's where you get these people who are extreme, and they're sitting there saying, "Oh, well, you're waffling and you're wishy." It's like, no, we're not, because life is not black and white.
It is not.
It takes real people to make real change, and that's where, again, we struggle. But these kind of conversations, I think, are going to help. With that story of Bob, I've been working on some of the housing stuff in our area. So let's talk about Crow Wing County for a minute. And there's all these new studies coming out saying that lack of affordable housing is actually the main reason for homelessness. And so what I think, and I go back to not necessarily the party, but there's some people in the party, in the Republican Party, who, don't want those people, right?
Right.
And you can have an apartment complex. And I mean, I look at even call out Hackensack, right? And just what they're trying to do up there. The developer's trying to develop housing. And I believe it was 4 units for Section 8, and the county commissioners voted down TIF. And it is unfortunate that we do have people willing to invest in rural Minnesota to address some of the housing issues, and yet we are fighting against people who, quote unquote, don't want those people here.
Right.
That's not okay. And I'm not saying that's just a party thing, but we've typically seen a lot more of that type of rhetoric and that type of belief in rural Minnesota.
Yeah. And in rural Minnesota, you hear our representatives, and I'm not, there again, not calling it out because they're not Democrat by any means, but, well, the Democrats are in power, so they're not listening to me. They're not doing that. Are you making your voice heard, though? Because I promise you, if you made that phone call, or better yet, you're down there, walk into their office.
That's exactly
right?
what I do. I
Yeah.
just walk right in.
Walk
Hey,
into the office and
be sincere.
Yes.
I need your help.
Yes.
Right? Be sincere about it. I don't think that's happening on both sides.
On
right?
both sides,
On both
absolutely.
Sides. This is not
Stop being backbenchers. Get out there, get in front of things. Listen to your constituents, not just the ones that are like you and, vote your party. Listen to all of them, because you're supposed to be representing all of them,
Yeah, and I did hear when we were at the Capitol a couple weeks ago, one of the people that I went down with, they had gone and talked to, she was telling me a story about how she had gone down there. I think it was something to do with health insurance, or it was something or another. And it was a Democrat that she was meeting with. And she, by the end of the conversation, they were like, yeah, I am not going to be able to support this bill because I have to vote party lines, right? And this happens on both sides, where we see this and nobody wants to make a move. And I do have someone who is a Republican in the House of Representatives. They live literally in a 50-50 district, and they were the only Republican on one of the bills last year to vote against one of the issues, and he physically was pushed against the wall because he was the lone Republican that voted. And again, we are seeing this, and nobody is doing anything about it.
This is why good people won't run.
That's 100% why, because it's like, if we vote for you, then all of a sudden you have to do what we tell you to do. And if you don't do what we, and the craziest part too, and I see this in city government, right, where, they watch one meeting and they see the way that it was voted on, right? But what they didn't do is follow the entire project or follow along the timeline. And then they're like, well, why did they vote that way? And I don't agree with this and that. And it's like, well, if you had been involved in the last 6 months and actually know what was going on, you might feel differently about it. And I think that, we see that down at the Capitol because you hear about the vote, the media takes it, right? Which includes crazy bills being introduced but are never going to go anywhere. But what does the media do? They take that crazy bill, and that's the headline, even though it's never going to go anywhere. And they use that as that's the only thing that's going on down there. And it's not. And so I just wish we would have, again, more people coming forth and really telling the story. Because the story is truly, I think, where people need to understand, like, how did we get there, not just.
Well, I think my wife put it best a few weeks ago when she was talking to our representative, and she said, "I got into this business to help people. I didn't get in this business to hate." And it's really hard to hate somebody once you sit down and know their story. And, going back to the beginning here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't hate you, because now I've taken the time, and you took the time. You didn't have to,
Yeah.
but you took the time to say, of course I've got time for you. You're a resident of my city. Of course I have time for you.
Right.
And made that time. And now look where we're at. I mean, we're talking 6 months later. I'm one of your biggest fans. Do I agree with everything that you do for the city of Breezy Point? Hell no. However, I can see the vision.
Yeah.
And I think the big picture is, especially for me who wants to retire here, right? Which is why we bought when we did. We want to retire here. And I want my kids and my grandkids to come up here.
Right.
But after some of the experiences with my granddaughter, who's biracial, I was like, oh my God, did I make the right decision in moving up here? However, I have not been discriminated against per se, right? I don't know what's said in the background.
I've never heard nothing.
Right. But I've had I had one gentleman talking about, he was gay bashing, and he said, any of them come into my yard, I'm going to shoot them on sight. And it's like, do you know how many times I've been to his house because his son's tried to commit suicide? Please don't call 911 if you're going to shoot me when I show up.
Yeah.
And the look on his face was like, oh my God.
Right.
Oh my God, I didn't realize what I just said.
Right. And it's like social media is so dangerous.
It is.
Because it's so easy to just say whatever you want in this split second, instead of really thinking about, like, what am I typing? Like, what effect does that actually have?
Another good example, right? Yeah. So CLC with the drag show being canceled, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm fired up over it.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm sending out a message to my friends that will make a difference. And I said, this is the letter I'm sending. Are you all on board with signing on? And Angel was one. Another very esteemed individual was another one that said, I can't really sign on to that yet. I don't know all the details.
Right.
Well, the more we got into the details of what's going on, this was so much bigger than him just making a threat. Yeah. And then I send out another message, hey, guys, I'm retracting this. We are not putting this out here because now that I know more of the story, we have a bigger issue here than just somebody making a threat.
Yeah.
And, I've been preaching for a few months now that we don't want all the mental health in institutions, and they wind up over here in the jail.
I want to talk. That was actually one thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because, Jen Schultz, actually, she came down there, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I'm a huge fan. Huge fan of Jen Schultz. She's brilliant in healthcare reform, and she's a professor of economics, and she comes from Section 8 as a child.
Yes.
A single mom, she grew up with a single mom. I just, that's America. Right?
Yep.
That's America right there. And but why don't you go ahead and tell people kind of what you've seen in the jail, because this is, most people don't know about this, and this is happening in our own county, and this is where, again, you want to solve problems, you got to start solving them in your backyard, and you're not going to do that by playing party politics. So
that's exactly right.
Tell people, what you've seen and actually why you're leaving, and it's.
Yep. So I have put in my 2 weeks notice. There was a conversation held. So and I'm sure they will listen. Some of the leadership listens to this. It's nothing that I hadn't already told them. So we have
And it's not just Crow Wing County, right?
no,
This is
no.
happening.
This is
This is not to be bashing Crow Wing County.
no.
This is just an issue
This is bigger than
everywhere.
This is bigger than Crow Wing County. It's bigger
Yeah.
than the state of Minnesota. This is a national issue that
Right.
needs to be handled. But I I have people that are they go to the hospital because they're having a crisis, right? And I'm going to use a total scenario that could happen, did not happen because I don't want to bring anybody out at the jail, right? So let's say it's a female who has been raped, who has been abused by men most of her life. Well, in walks a male doctor.
Okay.
So what's going to happen is she's going to withdraw from them, right? And she's going to be feeling like she's being attacked. And she's going to probably kick, throw a punch, whatever. Then the hospital's going to make a phone call, right? So they're calling 911. Now this person is getting arrested for battery, for disorderly conduct, for, whatever. Now they're sitting in jail.
Right.
Okay? So the jails have turned into, and like I said, this isn't no surprise to any of my superiors because they all know how I feel. The jails have turned into a detox unit and a mental health clinic. And we are not, as correctional officers, we are not trained to deal with that. We are trained to deal with violent people. We are not trained to deal with people who are having mental health crisis. And there's a lot of people now that are seeing that. We don't have enough mental health professionals.
Yeah.
The mental health professionals that I work with currently are phenomenal. I know one that stayed till like 10 o'clock at night trying to get somebody housed.
Right. Which is hard. I mean, you already talked about the lack of housing in general.
Right. And so trying to get them housed in a unit, so it's a 16-bed unit. Well, you've got 280 people maybe that are trying to be in that one bed.
Right.
And there just isn't enough, there's not enough resources for it. And then, one of my superiors made the comment, well, we had that big surplus. What'd you do with that?
If you were responsible.
like that's all my fault. Good point, though, right? We did have all this surplus. What was done to address the rural mental health crisis that we have? And it's so much more than just the drugs and the alcohol and the abuse and just.
Right. But it stems from the fact that we got rid of the state hospital. I think
Yes.
it was like 2001. And, I was meeting with Commissioner Barrows, who great man. He knows a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's really fighting for change in our
Mm-hmm.
community. And, he kind of was going through that process of that, like, how we got rid of that. And then the beds started to dwindle. And now we're shipping people to other cities. And so really just looking at like, how do we solve it? I mean, it's going to take everybody sitting down from all these different, whether
these aren't party issues.
No, they're not. But the trickle down effect makes it harder to do that, right? Like, even if it's not a party issue, people still are coming in with these, preconceived notions about who's on what side and who's to blame for this and who's not. And a lot of times if people think it's someone else's fault, they're just like, I'm not in, I don't, I'm not going to help because, well, someone else screwed it up, right? It's not my problem to fix, right? I hear that a lot too, where the Democrats, they did this last session, so you know what, we're just not going to, not our problem. And it's just like, no, there's a lot of issues that need to get fixed. And if we started in our, in our communities, I think that setting the example, and that's what we want to do. We want to set that example. And, it would be nice if, maybe the Republicans, the leaders in our Crow Wing County Republicans, I would love to get them together, with you guys and just let's have a party mixer, right?
Yeah.
Let's actually see if we can come together and discuss some of the local issues, right? The local issues, because there's a lot.
Yep. And if we start with our community,
right,
and they see it hasn't been that long ago, Angel. I don't know if you were in the area. I was not. But a good friend of mine, John Ward,
Oh, yes.
a-
Great
and
guy.
Joe Radinovich, right? And Carrie Rude.
Yep.
They would carpool.
Right.
They're all different
Yeah.
John probably the moderate.
Yeah.
Carrie Rude's
Pro-life
yep,
Democrat, right?
yep.
I mean,
Joe Rad.
yeah.
Gotta love Joe Rad just because of who he is. But a good Democrat. And then Carrie Rude, who was Republican. And
A moderate, right?
yeah,
All
very much.
much
Yeah.
like willing to vote, not in party lines, not, and that's what I like about all of them.
Right. And they would carpool together. And that's where we need to come back to.
Yep.
We need to come back to, sit down at the table, have that conversation. Because, Josh, if you're listening to this, I've been trying to reach out to you. I'm not a crazy Democrat activist.
I've told him that, so.
Okay. Well, see, you have my word for it. But we want that conversation so that I know you don't want to lose your job. So start representing everybody. And the same thing with Ben Davis. Ben, he called us a bunch of Marxist and a God and government thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that whole thing's recorded, so it's not too far from being put out there. He just the hate and the vitriol, it's got to stop.
Yeah.
You cannot legislate hate and get anything done.
And I think that's the problem too when we have the extremes. Like, so let's just say some of the, far left progressives that are at the Capitol, right? That are not, even, I feel like even when you're new to politics too, you kind of don't know how to get things done yet, right? You come in guns a-blazing and you have these views, and then pretty quickly you learn that's not what I thought it was, right? Yep. And you need those, more senior leadership who learns how to get things done together. And so I think what happens is you see kind of what goes on down there, and then it translates to your own community when it's like, wait a second, just because whatever is going on down there, that's probably not really what's going on up here.
That's exactly right.
And that's, again, where we need more people coming out and just saying, let's sit down and discuss it. Because like you said, it's hard to hate someone when you get to know them.
Yeah, and you know their story and why they're doing it and get the big picture. Because right now all you see is, the parts that you want to see.
Right. That's easy to do.
It is.
And sometimes you don't realize you're doing it because of the way you get information and who you surround yourself with, which is why I know better now. So when I hear an update on something, it's like, wait, I want the three sides, right? Like, I want to know what this means from this person and this person and this person, so I can then make an informed decision on what I believe and how to move forward. And again, you can't do that unless you invite and accept the invitation when somebody gives it to you.
And don't go in with an attitude, right? You got to go in with an open heart and open mind.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to survive this crazy little thing called life, right? And
not all survive.
Not everybody's. I plan
on
plan on sliding in, right? When it's my time, I'm going to be sliding in. But if we don't sit down and we don't have those conversations, one of our motto for the Crow Wing County Democrat is when we know better, we do better, right? And Paul Wellstone's was we all do better when we all do better.
Everyone liked Paul. I mean, and I heard from who I was talking to somebody about it, and they said the one thing about Paul was that even though I was a Republican, I would vote for him, was that when he said he was going to do something,
he did it.
He did it.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, they can respect that in someone. And, and sometimes you don't get to do what you want to do, right? Nope. You come in, and I did that coming into being mayor. I didn't realize that there were statutes governing what we could do, or I didn't realize, the the problem was a lot more complex than I thought
Right.
that it was, right? So
Right.
again, that's when your motto comes in. It's like, when we know better, we do better. And sometimes you don't know any better until you go and get the information,
Right.
or you step up for the role. And sometimes I think people misconstrue that as like, oh, well, you said you were going to do this and you didn't, and you're a liar, or you're this. And it's like, wait, did you ask them
Mm-hmm.
why? Instead of just, the why is so important, and we just don't ask.
Well, our former mayor, Tom, right, Lillihei,
Yeah.
he actually stood up and took up
Yeah.
for you in a meeting, and I kind of looked at him, and I remember hearing, because I wasn't here at the time, but I remember hearing my uncle talk about this awful city administrator that
Tell
they
people
had,
who your uncle is.
Dave Slipy.
Okay.
Yeah, and he had talked about how much money that this guy spent and spent and spent and spent, and my uncle was very frugal for
Yeah.
a Democrat, right? And he said now we have somebody that came in, which was Tom, did a cleanup,
Mm-hmm.
and we have this access,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or excess and access to be able to do more things and do better things.
Yeah.
And of course, before Uncle Dave had the pleasure to meet you, he passed on back in November. But he was 100% pro making this area grow.
Right.
Right? He's like, I want my kids and grandkids to come up here. He was tickled to death when we moved up here 4 years ago.
Right.
And he's like, hey, we're growing,
Yeah.
and when I called him and said, is there any place to buy up there, right? And I was looking for something close to him.
Right.
So that would have been on Pelican. And he and Aunt Terry, they walk out and they said, hey, here's gave me a realtor's number. And there's some houses around this area. So I called, talked to the realtor, told him what we were looking for and why I needed what I needed.
Right.
And he says, I think I have a couple places that will probably do just what you're looking for. Let me look and I'll call you back. So he calls us back. We've got 3 places to look at, and we wound up
Yeah.
out here on County Road 11, which has been fantastic. And then we got 3 wonderful years with Uncle Dave,
Yeah.
right
Be
before.
coming home.
Yes, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but we have to leave things. So he worked hard to make things better, right?
And was he council?
He
right?
was
And then he was county
commissioner,
or
county, just city council.
Council. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I think that too. People who have come to Breezy, let's just talk about Breezy, maybe. Is it's a resort town, right? People came out from the cities for their cabins, and I don't think anybody really expected that it was going to be the 3rd largest city in Crow Wing County,
Right.
with now an average age of 45.
right.
And what's happened is, because the demographics have changed, we have to look at, then again, the future.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people that don't like change. People believe that being fiscally conservative means you don't spend any money at all, which is just not true. And so, now we just have to balance that out. But I think that, that's where, again, bringing both sides together of just the views on it and coming to that compromise. And, I see a bright future for
Oh,
Breezy.
absolutely.
And
Compromise. What a
yeah.
brilliant concept.
Yes. Well, we're going to wrap it up, but thank you so much for coming over.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? Where's your office?
Our office is at 223 Washington Street in Brainerd. The office hours right now are Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 3. Our meetings are the first Thursday of every month. We have a social time from 4:30 to 6, and the meeting starts at 6. So swing by, say hi, see
Even
what
if
we're
you're
doing.
Republican.
Yes, everybody's
swing
welcome.
by and say hi. That's probably going to be my challenge for people.
Yeah.
Because I think that you're going to be very surprised to find just how much how probably great conversations you're going to have with
Absolutely.
people. And, you know, when we know better, we do better. So.
Absolutely. When we know better, we do better.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.